When Yamaha revealed that they were bringing Polyphonic aftertouch, one of the most celebrated features from the classic CS80, to the MONTAGE M, many people, myself included, were disappointed to find that only the MONTAGE M8x with its new GEX hammer action keybed could actually trigger it. But in this video, I'll show you how to unlock Polyphonic aftertouch for your MONTAGE M6 or M7. The MONTAGE M8x has a new hammer action GEX keybed capable of polyphonic aftertouch, where each key has its own independent aftertouch sensor so that aftertouch modulation can be triggered for individual notes. The synth action MONTAGE M6 and M7 models both retain the FSX keybed, which is derived from the FS keybed of the DX7 and featured on the original MONTAGE and the Motif series before it. While FSX is one of my favourite synth actions, it's limited to transmitting channel or monophonic aftertouch, meaning that when any key is pressed into the aftertouch zone, aftertouch modulation is triggered for all played notes. However, even though the M6 and M7 don't have a keyboard capable of triggering poly aftertouch, the underlying sound engines of all three MONTAGE M models are the same. In the past couple of years, a number of keyboard manufacturers have released synthesizers and MIDI controllers with poly aftertouch keybeds. These include the Waldorf Quantum Mark II, the UDO Super Gemini, the Arturia Polybrute 12, the ASM Hydrasynth, the Korg Keystage, and the Native Instruments Kontrol S Mark III. All of these can transmit poly aftertouch over MIDI, which means they can unlock poly aftertouch on MONTAGE M6 and M7. Right now, I've got this Native Instruments Kontrol S61 MK3 connected to my computer with a USB-C cable so it can browse and play virtual instruments through Komplete Kontrol, such as this Arturia CS80. But I have a USB switch behind here which allows me to easily change it so it's connected directly to the MONTAGE into one of its USB to device ports. And as soon as I do so, the Kontrol S becomes a secondary keyboard for the MONTAGE. And so of course, now we have a keyboard capable of transmitting polyphonic aftertouch, we can play all those wonderful new performances with poly aftertouch, often labelled as P.AT on the MONTAGE M. Let's quickly demonstrate that we really are playing poly aftertouch by switching the Kontrol S to transmit channel aftertouch instead. And when we do so, we can see that the MONTAGE M doesn't respond to those aftertouch messages unless we tweak the performance settings to respond to channel aftertouch instead. One thing that makes the Kontrol S a great choice as a poly aftertouch controller for MONTAGE M is its newly introduced support for MIDI templates, where the various buttons and encoders on the control panel can be assigned particular MIDI messages to make a really great custom controller for hardware synthesizers like MONTAGE M. In this MIDI template that I've built for MONTAGE M, I have access to the 8 scenes using the buttons above the screen, and I can adjust the 8 assignable knobs using the rotary encoders. If I switch to the next page, I have access to various sound shaping controls with the encoders, including filter cutoff and resonance, portamento amount, AEG attack, decay and release, and reverb and variation levels. Using the buttons, I can control the assignable switches in either latch or momentary modes, trigger motion sequences, and jump to the 3 set positions of the super knob. The attached expression pedal also controls the super knob, while the pitch and modulation wheels and the ribbon controller work exactly as you'd expect. I should mention that while the host USB port on the Kontrol S is connected to one of the MONTAGE's 2 device ports, the MONTAGE does not supply sufficient power to actually run the Native Instruments board, so I've got a separate USB-C power adapter connected to the power-only USB-C port on the back to provide the necessary juice, and I leave that connected all the time. Direct USB connection to the MONTAGE isn't the only option, so let's look at some alternatives. With the currently available firmware, the Kontrol S will completely disable its DIN MIDI ports while it has a connection over USB, although Native Instruments have made noises about potentially making this more flexible in the future. For now though, you need to disconnect the cable to the USB host port, and then the DIN MIDI ports become active, and you can connect a MIDI cable from the MIDI out on the Kontrol S to the MIDI in on the MONTAGE M. The MONTAGE M won't respond to incoming MIDI signals on this port unless you go into the settings to switch the MIDI port from USB to MIDI, but then, if the Kontrol S is transmitting on the channel expected by the MONTAGE M, it will respond as expected, with the Kontrol S playing all parts with keyboard control enabled. You can also set up separate key zones to play parts that don't have keyboard control enabled, but they can be triggered by messages on a different MIDI channel. Both of the connection methods I've described so far have the distinct downside in that they require the physical disconnection of the Kontrol S from the host computer, which is fine for a doorless setup, but less useful if you plan to use the Native Instruments board for its original purpose, namely playing virtual instruments through Komplete Kontrol. There are ways around that though, so let's reconnect the Kontrol S to my computer and go through them one by one. One of the simplest solutions involves using a simple MIDI routing utility such as MidiPipe to take any MIDI data coming from the Kontrol S and route it to the MONTAGE M. Here, I'll grab a MIDI in and tell it to listen to the primary port of the Kontrol S. Then add a MIDI out and point it at port 1 of the MONTAGE M. Now I can play the MONTAGE M with the Kontrol S, although once again we have some constraints related to the MIDI channels attached to each part of the montage performance. The next option involves routing MIDI via a DAW. I'll create a MIDI track and have it listen to the Kontrol S and tell it to output its MIDI data to the MONTAGE M. Behind the scenes, this is doing a very similar thing to what we just set up with MidiPipe, except that we can now create additional tracks to target MONTAGE M performance parts listening on different MIDI channels. The third solution involves setting the MONTAGE M as a MIDI output connection within the standalone Komplete Kontrol application. By doing this, any device set as an input to Komplete Kontrol will have its MIDI data forwarded to the MONTAGE M. So now the Kontrol S can not only play virtual instruments in Komplete Kontrol, it can also play the MONTAGE M. This can be a double-edged sword because now if you have an instrument loaded in Komplete Kontrol, the Kontrol S will play both the virtual instrument and the MONTAGE M at the same time, which may not be desirable. If you want to prevent this from happening, you need to either not load an instrument into Komplete Kontrol, or if you already have one loaded, you can switch it to an instrument mode that produces no sound output, such as the internal audio plugin. All of the techniques I've described are equally applicable to any other Poly aftertouch capable synthesizer or MIDI controller released in the last few years. Even the mighty Waldorf Quantum Mark II can be tamed into duty as a Poly AT controller for the MONTAGE M using a USB or DIN MIDI connection. Most MPE controllers, such as the ROLI Seaboard and the expressive E Osmos, can also play the MONTAGE M, although you'll need to configure them to send polyphonic aftertouch rather than MPE in order to do so. Of course, MONTAGE M is not just about the hardware, because the E.S.P plugin gives you unlimited instances of MONTAGE M as a software instrument within your DAW, and any of the keyboards I've mentioned can trigger Poly aftertouch with the software version, even with the MONTAGE M itself disconnected from your computer. So, if you're the proud owner of a MONTAGE M6 or M7, and you want to take full advantage of the polyphonic aftertouch capabilities of your synthesizer, hopefully this video will have given you the knowledge to do so in an easy and relatively inexpensive manner. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have in the comments, and I look forward to hearing from you.